Okay, this is going to be the final lecture for this course, and I'm going to talk about two topics. They're pretty much unrelated. I guess the only thing kind of separate or united them is they're kind of advanced topics. There are many other things to worry about in terms of writing um, well-constructed paragraphs and a well-constructed essay. And after taking care of things like making sure you have a complete sentence and that the ideas flow, you can start thinking about some of these topics. The first being words that help the flow of the sentence and help the reader guide be guided through the flow of the ideas in the paragraph. And then secondly, we'll talk a little bit about how adding some variety to the sentences it makes for a better paragraph and thus a better piece of writing. And you've seen these two before. They're our textbook, Elements of Style, which I hope you've read several times already by now. And maybe also you've read Fox and the Sox. And we'll see in a moment why I have this picture here of a blue herring. So what I'm taking from today, at least for the first part, is from this book I mentioned before, The Sense of Style. Liked it quite a bit, by Steven Pinker. He's a linguist. I don't know what his title is. Anyway, he's at Harvard, and he's written this really neat book about writing, and it plays off, of course, the elements of style, which he has comments about. Anyway, so he has this reproduces this article that appeared in a small newspaper in Massachusetts, I think someplace on Cape Cod. And I'm not going to read it all out loud. You can either pause it, that's probably the best thing, or read it on the PowerPoint version of this on Canvas. Would like to point out that the author was being a little bit sexist by saying that guys don't ask for directions because they're too stubborn. We don't ask for directions for good reasons, right, guys? Anyway, so please read through this because we're going to be taking a couple examples from this. Here's the rest of the article. I really like this part about he was too upset to read this because the herrings were eating the small birds as opposed to the litter of feral kittens. Anyway, Picker uses this to talk about some of these extra helper words, what I call helper words. And these are words like in general and more generally, where the author is trying to make a generalization, in this case about what these herrings do. Although, that little article is not the best source or example for some of these words. In fact, they're not used here, but I hope you can see the point which the author is trying to make, or Picker is trying to make, about using these words. We've talked about how it's good to be concise in your writing and not to have words that are not necessary. And I've in my comments about your essays, I've perhaps sometimes pointed this out, that your phrase could be written more simply. So getting rid of excess words or unnecessary words is always good. On the other hand, there are times we need to add words, and you need to add them not necessarily because they have much information per se, but they help the reader get through the paragraph. You're guiding the reader and telling him or her what's coming up or what's going on. So in general, or more generally, signaling to the reader that you're making a generalization, and here they'd be that they're total optimists. Another category is exceptions, and then exceptions, then generalizations, or generalizations first. That is, most of the time, Cape Cod winters are pretty mild, but then there are winters like this one. Now, we wouldn't say, I wouldn't use then there is. You've heard me rant before about their beginning sentences with their or phrases. Here we'd probably say something like, however, this winter was bad, or something like that in a more formal piece. Obviously, that article in this newspaper talking about the blue herring eating kittens is not formal writing. It's just a source of examples for using these helper words. So another way to go is you first give the exception and then give the generalizations. And then you may want to use words like nonetheless or nevertheless, still. And then you want to signal the sequence of events. using words like before, then, and so on. Here's some other words don't quite fit in that same set of categories that Pickner uses. Similar to, similarly, likewise. In contrast is another word. We saw that before. I'm a little bit nervous about this phrase, on the other hand. I often want to see on one hand, and then later on you say on the other hand. A bit perhaps not as formal as it's really kind of a idiom that may not be understood by others, but it can be used. For example, is used quite a bit, of course. Another way to think about these helper words is they may kind of signal to the reader that they should keep on going. Also, moreover, we've seen papers that just list things like first, second, third. That's fine. Just be very careful that you're not using that list, first, second, third, and so on, as a crutch for having having language that flows more in the paragraph. First, second, third kind of stops you at each of those points, and often, sometimes that's fine. There may not be a concise way of getting it to flow, but sometimes it can hide a problem and be kind of a lazy way of getting those ideas across. Another category of words are pause. For example, for instance, in other words. In other words, sometimes you should look at that. Do you really need to say that? But often, for example, and for instance, are good helpers that signal to the reader that you're just kind of taking a little pause and giving them a more specific case of the general problem that you've been talking about in the paragraph. And then there are times when you're going to tell the reader, look, we're going in a different direction now. However, on the other hand, there's the on the other hand again. Conversely, in contrast or by contrast. Not quite sure what the difference is in contrast versus by contrast. I once had a paper where I had in contrast, and the editor, rather rare for an editor really to start changing language like this, but anyway, the editor changed all my in contrast to by contrast. Okay, fine, wasn't going to argue. Means about the same to me, at least. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, let's talk a little bit about getting variety in our writing. And I'll begin with a quote. Haven't had any quotes for a while, and this one is from Albert Einstein. Now, he probably was describing not necessarily writing. He's probably describing, theories about the structure of the universe and relativity and that kind of thing. But these two sentences apply to writing. So, the whole purpose of writing in science is really not to be eloquent. You want to be able to get across the ideas and talk about the facts of your study and the observations. And by the end, you want people to understand what you found. You don't want them to be saying what a great, about the language. It's not about the language, it's about the science. So leave the eloquence to the tailor and to the English major writing the great American novel. And similarly, it gets back to, and again, he probably was talking about theories and mathematical models of how the world is constructed, not about language. But this also applies that you want to use the most simple words, but not too simple, or there you start to lose meaning. Anyway, hope you are inspired by those two quotes, and we'll forge on to talk about adding variety to your writing. I'm saying this is more advanced in the sense that one could write quite simply without any variety, and perhaps be considered. No, I'm not sure you'd be considered to be a good writer, but at least you'd be able to get by. It's kind of low bar, but sometimes that's good enough. So we'll talk a little bit about words, sentence structure, and length. So words, well, I think we've hit this a little bit before. And Pickner says we shouldn't vary words just for the sake of varying. In particular, you don't want to vary things as you're comparing or contrasting two things. But you do want to vary when you have things that are going in quick succession, or you're repeating a name, which not only would it sound monotonous, But worse is that you may mislead people into thinking that something new is happening. So I'm not going to give an example of this. Pickner gives this joke about the rabbi at the funeral. And he's looking for kind words about the newly deceased, and no one speaks up, and then finally someone says his brother was worse, or something to that effect. Anyway, so you may want to dig back through your PowerPoint copies of my PowerPoint about this and find that joke if you want. But let's talk about varying the words. And this is another thing that we talked about before, and this, you perhaps remember this paragraph where we went through and kind of dissected about why this was kind of hard to understand. And one reason why it's hard to understand is that the author introduces this term abiotic factors kind of midway through here. And it really is referring to this mixing between the fresh water of the groundwater and the salt water that's coming in from the estuary. And so it's a new term, and so it's variety, it's shorter, but I think it has the impact of making it a bit harder to understand. And so we talked about how you can fix that by just taking out abiotic factors and just talk more directly about mixing there. So let's look at another example. And this example is from a paper that a graduate student wrote for my graduate version of this course. And this person was writing about these isotopes. O18 is an isotope of oxygen that's used to trace temperature. And what you do is you look for this oxygen isotope. The most common isotope of oxygen is O16. So you're looking at the ratio of O18 to O16 to get an idea about what temperature was back millions of years ago. Okay, and so then you look at the shells of these foraminifera. So anyway, that's the science. So look at these two paragraphs. You looking at those? Reading them? You see a big problem? Well, when I first saw this, I thought, geez, maybe the student made a mistake and just copied and pasted and didn't need to repeat these two things. But of course, they're not exactly repeated. There's two different species of these foraminifera, and they just give different information. So there's differences there in the foraminifera. There's differences here. Well, there's no difference in the time frequency or time interval that the author's trying to get at for the temperature. And it's telling about, so there's slight difference. So in other words, it's really tough to see what's different. There's no variety here, or virtually no variety between these two paragraphs. And I think it's really a problem. I say it's not a terrible problem, but actually it's a pretty bad problem. But I guess the plus side, they're fairly clear sentences, has a maximum, minimum, so on, pretty clear, straightforward discussion of the data, right? And after all, that's what we're trying to do, is in formal writing for science. We're trying to be clear about the ideas and what data are being discussed. We're not trying to get really flamboyant about the language, about trying to make claims that are not supported by the data or previous studies. We're just sticking to the facts. But it's hard to read, isn't it? It's really hard to see what's, as I said, new in the paragraph. So what are the solutions? So one solution is you start using words that we just learned about, these words, these helper words that kind of point out the similarities or contrast between the two isotope records in these two different species of foraminifera. But it really, that would help a lot. That'd be like a band-aid to a pretty gashing wound in these two paragraphs. And a much more, a better solution is to vary how the sentences are constructed in the paragraphs. So it's not the same. And perhaps even more dramatically, you'd start thinking about mixing up the contents of those two paragraphs into making them one paragraph. I don't know. It would be more than just adding the helper words. So let's go and talk a little bit about varying the structure of sentences. So we're going to look at basically 4 versions of this paragraph describing the eruption of Mount St. Helens. I barely remember it, so it's definitely before all of you were born. Mount St. Helens was in, or is in, still, small remnants of it in Washington. Uh, Quite a dramatic eruption. Um, the only people that were killed was one guy who just refused to evacuate from the mountain, and so it was really kind of a quite a dramatic eruption that affected the northwest part of the country. So anyway, I'll read a bit of it just to give you a sense of what's going on. Mount St. Helens erupted on May 18th. A cloud of hot rock and gas surged northward. The cloud devastated more than 500 square kilometers. The effects of Mount St. Helens were well documented with geophysical instruments. The origin of the eruption is not well understood. Okay, I'm not going to keep on reading. But you should look at what this paragraph is all about. Look at each of the sentences. I think they're quite good. But look at I hope something's not quite saying to you that something's not quite right. Sorry. So this brings it home. What's not right about that sentence, about that paragraph? Same material, so the facts haven't changed. It's just a way that they're being described. Mount St. Helens erupted on May 18th, 1980. Its slope collapsing. The mountain emitted a cloud of red rock and gas. Within minutes, the cloud devastated more than 500 square kilometers of forests and lakes. Although the effects of the eruption were well documented, the origin is not well understood. Okay, so keep on going through here, and and I hope you can perhaps start to see what's the difference between this one and this one. So what's happening here is that here we have pretty straightforward sentences. We have basically subject, the cloud devastated, and direct object, more than 500 square kilometers. The effects of Mount St. Helens were well documented. Subject, verb. Here passive, but still pretty straightforward. The origin is not well understood. Again, subject, verb. All these sentences have basically the same structure, exactly the same structure. Versus this one, we start off with within minutes, a dependent clause. Its slope collapsing, again a dependent clause, and then we start with the main guts of the sentence. Here we have this rhetorical question that kind of breaks up the what I'm getting at here is that this is pretty much the same structure. Each of the sentences are exactly the same structure, whereas here we have different structures, and that gives variety to the writing, and it makes it much more interesting. What gives a little bit more variety is this rhetorical question. I really advise not to do that. I mean, I would not want to say you can never do it, but definitely be really careful about it. It's just not a good way of, I don't think, a good way, a technique or device to use in formal scientific writing. You don't see it that much. And before we leave this, as I was reviewing these notes, I finally saw a form of citing references that many of you have used. Perhaps I was being a bit harsh in correcting all of these, but I just never have seen this before, and I hope you know by now, in all the forms of writing for at least the marine journals that I published in, you always have the period after the reference, as so. Extremely small detail, and of course you have parentheses rather than that full bracket like that. Just a really, really small detail, but well, there it is. Okay, so what's different? Version 2 is a lot more interesting and fun to read than version 1. It's because the sentences are different. They have different structure. And so, as I said, the first version basically has only simple sentences. Now, there's one independent clause with a noun and a verb. So, example of that: larvae from a larva, larvae from a larva, non-explosive eruption, or ordinarily contains only 2% water. So, subject, verb. A compound sentence, which is a bit more, basically a version of the simple, is you have two simple ones joined by a conjugation. And here, so this is a sentence by itself. Precursor activity began on March 20th. And then this is another sentence. Many times during the 2 months, the mountain shook for minutes. Both of these are independent sentences, or independent clauses, and they're joined here by a conjunction. And as some of you have tried to do this, and we see this in published papers, and it's just wrong. It's one of my many pet peeves. Is you can't use however as a conjunction here. So you can't use however as a conjunction, and so you can't. I mean, it wouldn't make any sense to use it there, but you can't. But you can use and or some other conjunction. That's about the only one that really works there. And you'd have a period before it because these are two independent clauses, two independent sentences. They would sit by themselves fine, right? They're complete sentences by themselves, and we're just joining them together for whatever reason. It's not, can't really judge whether it's good joining together or not without knowing what's around it in the paragraph. And then finally, a third type of sentence. I suspect there's more, but at least there are these three, where you have the independent clause joined or put together with more dependent clauses. So the dependent clauses are not full sentences, whereas an independent clause is a complete fine sentence by itself. So the independent clause here is the eruption itself had been expected for weeks. That's if you just had that by itself, it would be fine. The dependent clause is although the amount of devastation caused by the May 18th blast was a surprise. So you can't have that by itself. So it depends on the independent clause. I mean, you could easily make this a independent clause by getting rid of the though, but that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to give some variety to our writing by having this complete sentence. Okay, so, and there's still one other way of getting variety into your writing, and this is a bit more subtle, and something I have to say that I bet is really not followed quite very often in science writing. So look at this, and a tip off of what we're talking about here is that the number of words in each of the sentences is given after the sentence. So I'm not going to go through and read them. This is also kind of boring. I mean, to give away the answer, it's kind of boring because you have the same number of words almost in each of the sentences. But also it's kind of boring because of the other problems, because you basically have photographs taken, show that photographs in time, established. And so again, we have almost the same structure. We have a bit more variety because we have things like on the morning of, and then we have of significance, a bit more variety caused by those dependent clauses and those phrases, but it's still boring because of the structure of the sentences are all the same, and also because the number of words in the sentences are the same. So here's another version, and it's not complete. I don't think completely. Oh, maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too far off on differences or lack thereof of sentence structure. But anyway, what is clear is that the number of words in these sentences vary by quite a bit. So this version is much more interesting to read. I hope you'll agree than this version, number 4. Okay, so it doesn't work as well because as number 4 because the length of the sentences is very similar. So these examples are from this book, and he recommends that you keep the number of words in a sentence in the teens, so between 11 and 20 or 19. Now I have to say I never have counted the number of words in a sentence, and I doubt anyone really does that. Folks just have a sense of how long the paragraph, the sentence has gone. Now, as I think about that, you remember one of the sentences in the Alexandra Petrie's satire piece really kind of went on, right? If you, I don't remember exactly the sense of it, but it had this feeling of the author just kind of rambling, basically, right? And it would have flunked this guideline of keeping the number of words in the teens. But anyway, it's perhaps if you were ever thinking about it, you could count them, but like I said, I doubt anyone really does that. But they do have a kind of feel for how long the paragraph, how long the sentence is, and we'll know whether it's gone on too long, or alternatively, perhaps more common is they're too short or really too many very short sentences. And so he recommends you change the length every second or third sentences and occasionally have very long and very short sentences. So yeah, I think that mix is good. And so as I look at this, at first I thought, well, I don't know if we actually do this, but in fact, in science, we do this a little bit. We have sentences that look like this. I think having every sentence being long is hard to read, if not boring. On the other hand, if you have all sentences on this length, it's also going to be boring, right? It's going to be too I don't know, shotgun approach or to machine gun approach. Or you're getting these facts one after another, and it's hard to kind of assimilate them, I think, and it's not very interesting. But I have to say that there's a few of you that really should just think more about keeping it simple. KISS, remember the KISS principle, and go for this type of sentence. I very distinctly remember one of my first sessions with my PhD advisor going over some writing, and he just chopped up all my sentences to very short sentences, and that's the way he wrote. And he had a good point of that's the most most safest way to make sure that your message is not lost in the thicket of words. So there's something to be said about short, direct sentences like this one right here. But the best writers are able to vary the sentence length. So overall, we talked already about varying how sentences begin. Really, it's about varying the structure. We just finished about a little discussion about how you should think a little bit about varying the sentence length. We haven't talked about this last one, and that is varying the length of the paragraphs. And we've talked about how some sentences, some paragraphs are too long. I think many of you object to seeing these very long paragraphs. I think sometimes it may be a bit unfair because if they are coherent and have lots of information about one idea, there's a good argument for that. What's more clear is that when you have very short paragraphs that really, again, it's a symptom of a problem. They're often short because there's just not enough information given about the topic. Now, there are times when the topic doesn't deserve to be talked about more and should be short, but often it's the case that more should be said about the idea that the paragraph is supposed to be about. So this is the one that I think of all these. I wonder how I would emphasize. I would not emphasize that one at all. I would place the least importance to that one, but certainly these other ones are important. And but really, as I said, this is in some ways kind of advanced topics, and this is always the first thing to do is make sure your thinking is in order, that your ideas are organized, and then use pieces of paper perhaps or whatever outlines or whatever it takes for you to get those ideas in order. And then use perhaps some of those helper words or even sentences that help to link the ideas to show the reader what the logic is behind what you're trying to get across. So that's really first. And then you start to think about trying to get some of this variety into your writing. Okay, I think that's it. I hope that is of help in writing your last essay and last long essay, and then you have one more short essay before you're all done.